I mean, Syria at that point in time when we got the call, I'd been in before a few weeks earlier, and the situation was critical. I got the call again, Paul, go to Syria today. Get out there, meet Marie in Beirut. So we met up. We through the same methods, smugglers and bit of money passing hands, and very clandestinely crept through minefields and through the army posts into Syria. And essentially Homs had been under bombardment for, I think it was about 14 days at the time. And they were just trying to crush, they saw Homs as the centre of the revolution, the heart of the revolution, the Assad military forces. So they were just literally trying to crush it. And we could follow it. There were people in there broadcasting live images of the attacks. And it was kind of strange. You see this complete devastation going on, and you think, well, that's where I'm trying to get to, which is a strange feeling to see such devastation and think that's our destination. But we got in, and we went in with the Free Syrian Army. We got to Homs, and we had to crawl through a 3-kilometre stone sewage drain to get under the freeway into the city. So, and there was no oxygen in there, and they were taking weapons and bringing bodies out, and it was all in this tiny little tunnel that we had to go through. And no matter what position you got in, it was hell, because you're trying to find a position that it didn't hurt in, but because of the lack of oxygen, your muscles started cramping. And we just came out into, it was like coming out into Armageddon. You were in Homs, you weren't in the neighbourhood that was getting the shelling, but you could just see what was happening, the white flashes. So we reported from there. We got a story out one Sunday. We came out for a few days because we thought there was going to be an invasion into Bab al-Amra by the forces. And then we went back in again after a few days. We didn't tell our editors. We just sneaked back in. On the second trip in, the situation, even over a few days, had just deteriorated. The first day there, we could not leave the building. The shelling was, we were counting 30, 40 shells per minute around the building we were in. It was just, I've done a few wars, but this was the most ferocious bombardment. Both Marie and I said, I've never seen anything like this. We both agreed it was the worst we'd seen. But by the next day, we woke up and the shelling had intensified again, and we more or less knew we weren't going to get out. We thought, right, we've got a problem. We're in the middle of a story. 28,000 civilians trapped in this neighbourhood, and we're not going to get a story out by Sunday. We knew something was about to happen, and we didn't think we'd get out alive, to be honest. So we made the decision with we talked to the media guys, the activists who were transmitting and getting stuff out, that we were going to do CNN, BBC and Channel 4, do live stuff, because we thought if we wait till tomorrow, there may be no tomorrow. So we did these transmissions, they went out, and at 7 o'clock the next morning we woke up, got into the room. We were going to go try and visit the field clinic, and I had 2 rockets land about 100 metres either side of the building. 30 seconds later, another 2 rockets hit, and at that point, I was an ex-artilleryman. I realised that they were bracketing and walking the shells in. They had a drone flying above, and as I realised what was happening, the first rocket came into the building, and the room that Marie and I had both been sleeping in was just removed from the map, and I went, my camera's in there, ran back in, saw my bag in the rubble, grabbed it, and I ran down the corridor back to the main room that had no windows onto the street. And then another shell took out the corridor that I'd just run down. And by now the house was just thick and black. The explosives from the shells and the dust, and it was chaos. There were people that had been injured. Then another shell hit above us, and so part of the ceiling collapsed. And I thought at that point it was over. I thought 3 shells, it's done its damage. So I bent down to pick my camera up that I dropped, just about to get a shot of it, and then just an almighty explosion. Another one, but the biggest of all. So I was still standing, and I felt something that hit my leg, like a piece of rubble or something. So I kind of leaned down and just thought, I'll check that. And as I put my hand down, my hand just slipped and came out the other side of my leg. So I was actually stood there with my hand through my leg, and I was like, oh, that's not good. But rather bizarrely, for the first 10 seconds, I was stood there going, oh no, hospital food. I was thinking rubbery potatoes and cold custard. This horrible image, and I was like, but don't worry, people can bring you food in. And then it was like, hang on, snap back to reality. So I thought while I was in my leg, I grabbed the main artery and checked that was pulled intact, and the bone, and that was intact. And then I had a keffiyeh scarf on, wrapped it around my leg and tried to tourniquet it. And then it was like, oh, I've got to find Marie, because I thought Marie had got out of the building because someone had been screaming, get out, get out. So I took a few steps and my leg just buckled and I fell over. And I just fell next to Marie, who was obviously dead. I double checked that she was dead, but and Remy Oshlich was also dead. But in that time it took me to get there and fumble about, the drone had obviously spotted me moving in the rubble, so they then opened fire again and started shelling the street. So I was kind of just pinned down in the rubble while the next attack went on. And the guys from the media centre were trying to come out to get me in and drag me in, but there was so much shrapnel flying about that if they'd have come out, they'd have just been ripped to pieces, because only the fact that I was so low in the rubble, the shrapnel, it was whizzing past my face. So I just had to lay there, and I put on an Ethernet cable, grabbed it, tied it around my leg as tight as I could, and after about 15 minutes the shelling stopped and they just dragged me inside. But until that point I hadn't felt any pain. It was just like my body had obviously flooded with endorphins, whatever it is that makes you go, oh, that doesn't hurt. By the time I got inside it was like, oof, that smarts a little. And then 10 minutes later it was like, no, it actually does hurt quite a lot. And so they just, about 15 minutes we had the car screech up, and it was the Free Syrian Army. And they kind of yanked us out of the building, dragged us, threw us into, me and Edith Bouvier, threw us into a car and took us, ironically, to the field hospital that we'd been trying to get to, where the doctors I knew the doctors, we'd been there before to film and shoot. And he was like, Paul, what are you doing? And so, hole in my leg. And he kind of looked at me and went, oh, so you do. And he said, we've got no anaesthetics. And I was like, yeah. So he said, I'm going to have to operate on you now. But he said, give me some paracetamol. I was like, nice one. Ibuprofen, one of them. But I had this great big lump of hamburger meat hanging out my leg. And he just got a pair of scissors and I said, can I smoke? He said, you can do anything you want to. So I was literally sat up having a fag while he was cutting this muscle out. And the nurse, as soon as I put a cigarette out, the nurse would light another one and put it in my mouth. And he goes, now we're going to clean it. And I was like, great, can't be as bad as cutting the muscle out. And but all the time this was happening, the hospital was being shelled, the building was being hit by shells. So they got a bottle of iodine and a toothbrush, poured the bottle of iodine in and just scrubbed it with the toothbrush. And every time I thought it was clear, another shell had hit and the dust had fall into the wound, and they'd have to do it again. And then he got a staple gun and kind of just, because they said you've got to escape. They sealed both sides of the wound. Normally they'd leave one side open. So I just had to, they did that, and then they bandaged it up, and they put us in a house then, about 50 metres away from the hospital, which was a target. And we ended up staying there for 5 days in this building. But the regime by then had found out which building we were in. So for 5 days we just sat in the pitch black. We'd put mattresses up against the window, and we just stayed there for, you know. And then it was like there was no way out. They sent in the Syrian Red Crescent to get us out. Some ceasefire was negotiated, but the head of the mission said to me, look, discreetly, he said, don't get in the ambulance, they're going to execute you when you get out. Throw your bodies on the road and make it look like the Free Syrian Army attacked us and we were killed by the rebels. So we had to let the ambulances go and not get in them. And just, it was like, oh, I can't get any worse than this. And then a guy comes in and goes, Paul, bit of bad luck, bit of bad news. And I was like, can't be any more bad news. He said, the tunnel's been blown up. So that our only other option to escape had just been blown up. A shell had hit the tunnel and blocked it. So that was it. There was no escape then. There was, the ambulances had gone, the tunnel had been blown up, and so we just had to sit it out. Just not knowing any way of getting out. You know, obviously with the injuries we had, you can just get out and run away because he couldn't get out. The city was surrounded. Complete, like a medieval siege. And eventually, after 5 days, they came in. He said, "We've fixed the tunnel. We've dug it. We've dug out the dirt. Get in the trucks." So they just dragged us, put a pair of trousers on me, threw me in a truck, and they had all their headlights on. So it was a last-ditch attempt to get us out, to get all the injured out of Babarama. There were a lot of injured. And so we just drove through this bombardment because they had the lights on and they were targeting. There were mortars, shells, machine guns, snipers. It was just like this crazy 4-mile drive to the tunnel where they tied me on a rope, dropped me down the hole. And then they converted a motorbike to run in this tunnel. You had to get on it and lay flat, and the driver laid flat. And they put a kid on behind me that all the flesh blowing off his legs. And we just drove through this storm drain, this little tiny tunnel, until we reached the blockage. And I thought they'd cleared it, but it was actually just a hole about that big that they said, get in there and crawl through. And it was like, I had no choice. You know, I got in this and I got halfway down and got stuck. A big piece of the reinforcing concrete, steel, went through my leg again into the wound. So it was like a barb. I was hooked on it in this space about that big. And in the end, the only way I could do it was to just wrench, because I couldn't go backwards, couldn't get my hands through, because the hole was so small. So I just had to pull my leg off this metal hook and ripped it open even more. Got through the tunnel, and a couple of guys there had to crawl across a couple of 100 metres across the field because there were snipers everywhere, and he said, just... And got about 200 yards to a corner and 2 rebels grabbed me. And then it was like a 4-mile walk across walls and through ditches and farmlands with these 2 guys kind of supporting me. Where eventually they got me to a vet who stitched up, cleaned and washed and stitched up my wound again. And then after that, I think it was another 2 or 3 days. We then had to cross the front line of the main battlefield, and you know, we did that on motorbikes and cars, any way we could, to get me to Lebanon. Where once we got to Lebanon, we then had to dodge Hezbollah, who were patrolling the area. So even in Lebanon, it wasn't ideal because they were out looking for people coming out of Syria. And I eventually, you know, through hook and by crook, made it to Beirut, where I was greeted with a bottle of scotch and 40 Valium. And I just sat up all night with a guy from the Sunday Times who was waiting for me, being coordinating any attempts at getting us out. But you know, it was just we had to do it ourselves. That no one could get in or out. And eventually the British ambassador invited me to stay at his house, and they said you can't see a doctor because there were death squads going around the hospitals looking for us. They put $1 million on our heads, dead or alive. So they had to get a friendly doctor in to look at me and say, it needs big operations, you get to London. So they eventually put me on a little jet that the News International had lined up And I got on as a really hot nurse and a doctor, and I'm like, oh, this is all right. Got on, he laid me, strapped me to this stretcher. He said, oh, you got two options. He said, you can have either ibuprofen and paracetamol or whiskey and morphine. And I just went, fill me up, doc. And he just gave me a huge shot of morphine. And it was the first time in 9 days I could feel it spreading through my body. I'm just waiting for it to get to my leg. And as it got to my leg, it was just like, but it went, and it was just such a great feeling when the morphine kicked in. I'd knocked back the whiskey by then. I said, there's another whiskey. I said, couldn't do a fag before we take off. Can I have a fag? And he went, yeah, go on. I was in this little Learjet on the runway full of morphine with a bottle of scotch and a fag, and it was just like, yeah, I'm going to be all right. It was at that point, I was like, the switch off now, and it was just like, best flight I've ever had. If you do that on BA, I'd be laughing. So yeah, that's what happened.